All right. I am super excited to talk to you guys today. We are talking about how the tech interview process is completely broken and how you can use that to actually get a tech job this year or 2025. All right. And so we have Coach Keith here with us today, who's an amazing technologist, has been in the industry working on AI and machine learning research for what, over 20 years now, Keith, would you say?
Yeah, in total. In industry about 10 to 15.
Right, exactly. And so I'm Dr. Emily. I'm a retired computer science professor, and I was helping students become six-figure software developers, for over 10 years as well. And so we've both, on different sides of the table, been seeing challenges with the tech interview process, right? So I was seeing it from the student perspective, and I've continued to see it from the student perspective and starting the Joy of Coding Academy, right? Launching my own coding school. But Keith has also been seeing it from the hiring standpoint. And so we're just super excited to share this with you today because, in fact, the disconnect, the gap between people wanting to get hired for tech jobs and people trying to hire for those tech jobs is the reason why I created this whole thing, right? Why I created the Joy of Coding Academy, the Tech Joy Career Academy. Like, this is literally the reason why, because I could see that college as a vehicle wasn't going to get it done. Keith can also probably speak to that and the challenges that are faced there. And really, the only solution was to create a new one, right? And so that's where some of our insights have come from. So super excited. So, Keith, do you want to just give us a brief overview of your perspective as someone who has tried to hire tech workers of how challenging that interview process can be?
Yeah, so I would say, and we were just talking about this briefly before, just that what I've seen is that there's a lot of frustration on all sides of the system. And so to me, that you can look at that and sort of despair, or you could look at that and say, okay, there's actually a lot of opportunity to
Mhm.
have a system that is better for everyone involved, that, gets people into jobs faster, that, once you open a job, gets people actually working and productive more quickly. It could be better for everyone. And so the different kinds of folks that I've experienced that frustration from or with, like for me, of course, I've interviewed at places, I've experienced that frustration myself. I coach people, I understand a lot of the frustration that people experience going into industry. On the hiring side that you're getting into, um, hiring managers have all different kinds of frustrations. The people interviewing have frustrations that tend to be a little bit different than the hiring managers. And then you tend to have recruiting teams or talent teams or HR teams that have a whole different category of frustrations. So, and then you have others that are sort of higher up in the company that have different kinds of frustrations with the thing. So it's kind of all different sides of the equation. But to give you a sense of what it feels like as a hiring manager, you open a role. Say it's
Mhm.
an entry level role that requires no experience, or maybe like an internship level of experience. Uh, if you're at a large company, well, maybe I'll start with the small company because that's my experience. If you're at a smaller company and it's an attractive role, you're going to get maybe 100 to 200 applications on the first day, and um, that was like 4 years ago. Now it's actually quite a bit worse.
Yeah, like,
Um,
would you say what, like 500 to 1,000 on your first day?
Maybe. So if you talk to people from bigger companies that have household names, they have high salaries, they're going to get 1,000, and or more. And what you have to keep in mind is that that role, that is for one role. The hiring manager may have multiple open roles, so you got to multiply that. And then their partners on their talent team or their recruiting team are partnering with a lot more hiring managers. So they might have a
Mhm.
portfolio, a recruiter might have a portfolio of like 10 to 30 roles that they're supporting.
Wow.
And so you have uh, a percentage of two people dealing with this onslaught of thousands of resumes coming in the door.
That's a lot. How do they even filter? I mean, this is why we have automated filters, right? Essentially.
Yes and no. This is a lot of the motivation for it. I didn't work at a company where it was big enough to really merit that. But this really gets into some of the challenge where companies often might use a recruiter to screen resumes. They hire dedicated people that are maybe compensated less than software engineers usually, and they're helping to screen resumes among other things, but they're doing this for multiple different jobs as
Right.
quickly as humanly possible. And so a lot of folks in that space, they're not doing the software engineering job, and so they have some understanding of it because they're partners, right? But um, they don't necessarily know like all the latest JavaScript frameworks and such, right? And so a lot of times they're looking for keywords. And so
Hmm.
from a candidate's perspective, that might feel like automated screening, but it's actually a person.
Okay. Right, because the person may not actually be able to read between the lines, excuse me, and understand what it is that things mean. Like they may not know that, knowing, React JS is similar to knowing Next.js or Angular. Like they might be looking for very specific frameworks.
Right.
It's like, okay, I'm only looking for this.
Right. And keep in mind that they're filtering this gigantic onslaught of resumes coming in the door. And so they're just trying to narrow it down as quickly as possible.
Right. Because
And
their job is to get through the file.
yeah, and
Right.
it's generally the roles are salaried roles, and so there's pressure to get through as many resumes as come through the door, which means they get pressured to do more work for the same pay. And so
Never a win.
it's a tough situation. It's a really tough
Yeah.
situation. What I tried to do at 98.6 was to take on a lot of the resume screening myself as the hiring manager to offload, because I just felt bad for the people that are getting just crushed by all this. I could offload some of that, and then also since I knew the technology is involved, it was I could read between the lines a bit more, so it
Right.
wasn't so much of a keyword filter. But it's tough. I'll tell you. It's I could dive into any area in here if you want. I think there's things that are tough about the logistics of it, of like how do you deal with 1,000 resumes coming through the door is a really tough situation. And then there's more high level problems where that are also really tough, just to give a sense of what some of these things feel like. So the hiring manager may have had to fight with people for anywhere between 1 to 3 months to get that role on the web page. So that's the backstory of how it got
Right.
there. They might have been fighting with people about budget. They might have been fighting with people about what team should this role be on. They might have been fighting with people about the wording of the job description. Some companies are
Mhm.
have very strong policies about that. That can go well, that can go poorly, all kinds of challenges there. And then, in working with, hiring manager working with their partners in a recruiting organization or a talent organization, there can be a lot of cultural challenges there. Even from a previous company, I had heard someone in the talent space like thanking an engineer for treating them like a person.
Wow.
Like to them, that was special.
Right, exactly. I know, just being treated with human
Just
dignity was not part of their job hunt process previously, basically, is what you're saying, right?
and that's awful. Like,
Right.
like people, we're all trying to, accomplish a job together. Uh, like there should be a baseline level of respect,
Right.
same team. But a lot of people go through situations like that where there is this inequality, and hiring managers sometimes, the way sometimes that goes is that hiring managers sometimes feel the pressure to get those roles filled, and so they just pass that pressure along to someone else in a
Mhm.
way that is, sometimes dehumanizing. And
Right.
so there's a lot of levels of problem throughout the whole thing. There's sort of the people side of it that we kind of
Mhm.
feel at the end of the day, where we might be like grinding our teeth at night over that kind of thing. And then there's the logistical parts, which are problems that we can work through, almost like working through computer problems, where it's like solving a puzzle.
Exactly, exactly. And so what I'd love to highlight, Keith, thank you so much for sharing that perspective because I think the big takeaway is, if you've been frustrated on the job hunt, don't take it personally because there's many factors, many stakeholders, many players. It's an imperfect system. And most people in the system are aware of its imperfection, but they're just still functioning within it to move things forward because what else can they do, right? And I guess the other thing I would love to highlight, Keith, especially because you've been on the other side, trying to hire people, looking at resumes, reading between the lines. Do you have any guidance for candidates who are crafting their resume? I often get get these questions about how to not necessarily structure the resume, but how to share like what they've done in a way that communicates that they actually know what they're doing because anyone on the internet can Google and say I know JavaScript and put enough and like fake it enough on their resume to like make maybe a hiring manager who has no tech skills think that they have the chops when in reality they don't. So like do you have any recommendations for when someone who's actually technical is looking for the resume, what they are needing to see versus a hiring manager maybe who only has the keyword list?
Um, I would say it's a really tough question because so much of resume optimization is there's so much
Yeah.
help out there for resume optimization. As a result, that means that resumes are more and more optimized over the years.
Mhm.
And it's become easier and easier, especially with generative AI, to do resume optimization for specific roles to get that initial call.
Mhm.
The stuff that I was when I was in a hiring manager, I didn't have to deal with generative AI customized resumes at the time. So it's tough to say what it would be like now. What I'm trying to get at is that it shifts, it changes and shifts.
Mhm.
The kinds of things that I tended to look for is impact, because that was a little
Mhm.
bit tougher to fake.
Yeah.
So have you actually helped users? Have you worked on products that were actually in production? There are a lot of people that might maybe they've done some work and might exaggerate it a little bit or such. There's all kinds of exaggeration that happens in resumes, but um, I think there's a bit of that, but then I think a lot of it comes down to this time pressure, right? So if you if you're in that hiring manager role, I would say like, look, try out some candidates, have a phone call with some more folks. And the initial phone call is usually pretty short, so like 20 to 30 minutes, kind of short.
Mhm.
Do a bunch of those, try out some people, learn from what they say to adjust how you're filtering resumes. So the way that you filter resumes is going to adapt based off of the candidates that you're seeing come through the door.
Right.
But yeah, I would say, like, look, make sure you have the keywords in there because there's going to be some folks screening on keywords. And then, beyond that, it's really to enable a conversation, right? Like each stage gets you to the next stage. So like the purpose of the resume is to get you on the phone with someone.
Mhm.
Maybe it'll enable some later conversations, but the main point is to get you in that phone call.
Yep.
And then beyond that, it doesn't matter nearly as much.
Awesome. No, thank you so much for sharing that, Keith. And in fact, we shared actually just last week a way that you can actually increase the time that someone spends with your resume and the likelihood that they actually call you back. And the key way we do that is actually with connections. And so that's something that we've recommended inside the Joy of Coding Academy for a long time because when you're an unknown quantity, when this is like your first position or maybe you've been off you haven't had a job for a while and right and you're going back into it, you're re-entering the workforce, someone has to take a chance on you. And the fastest way to make sure that someone actually looks at your resume is to have some kind of a connection because what can happen, and I don't know, Keith, if this ever happened to you, but what can happen is that someone says, "Hey, did you see Bob's resume?" And they say that to the hiring manager. And now the hiring manager either has to tell them, "Yes, I did, and we're interviewing him." That's the good news they want to share. Or they have to say, "Oops, I missed it." Well, they're not going to say that. They're going to go back and review the resume. And now they have to pay enough attention to articulate why they're moving forward or not, because now someone they know, a social connection, is actually asking about it. So it holds them accountable. And so this is one of the fastest ways we've learned to help resumes not be ignored. And so our students get more offers than typical first timers. Keith, did you ever have situations like that where you saw connections playing out in the job hunt?
Um, a bit, but not quite in that way. So connections played out in a couple different ways for me. So in that story that you were sharing, the kinds of ways connections would play out in that is that someone say, oh, such and such a friend, applied or something like that. But what you have to keep in mind is that like I was pretty diligent about resume review. So like the first 10, 15 minutes of every day was resume review for months when I was in hiring mode.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
And keep in mind that the rest of my responsibilities don't diminish during that time period. So I would just have to get in early.
Add 15 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, basically. And so, or, I'd try to find time somehow or other.
Mhm.
But so typically I would have seen those resumes one way or the other. Occasionally there would be some kind of strange situation in which I missed one. That could happen if I had a role that wasn't getting many candidates, or something happened where the email wasn't coming through. We would usually get email notifications about candidates that hadn't been reviewed for over whether it's a day or two or something like that. So it could point me to that. In terms of that feedback loop, in terms of like someone's asking about their friend or something like that. In general, I would share much less information than what you're describing, because it's kind of private.
True.
So it's a little bit of a breach of privacy to share a lot with that person. But you could say, oh yeah, I saw it, and we're looking at it or something like that, or oh, we're talking to them, tomorrow, or some such. Some things that are fairly basic. But there is in general a lot of guidance in to hiring managers not to provide too much feedback externally.
Mhm.
And there's another part of this equation that we haven't quite got to yet, which is about bias, which is about essentially having channels that are only available to certain candidates.
Mhm.
And in an industry that historically has not been very diverse, when people recommend people that they've worked with, it tends to pull the industry towards that lack of diversity. And
Mhm.
so you have to be very considerate if you're considering, referrals and such, and how you deal with that. So you don't want to use referrals to give people unfair advantage. It's fine to say, okay, I'll take a look, which is what I would do for any candidate, or what I'm trying to do for any candidate, but you don't want to give advantage.
Right.
Another way that this thing plays out is also in like informational calls. So if it's like a
Mhm.
friend of a friend situation, I'll say, they're curious about the company. If they're curious but they haven't applied, then maybe I'll talk to them at that kind of a conversation. And that usually doesn't give them an unfair advantage, but helps them figure out whether they want to go through the process, or maybe I can help them find a better role or something like that elsewhere in the company.
Right.
But there's a bit of subtlety to it, and so the referral pipeline is going to cut through the noise, especially with a hiring manager that's overwhelmed.
Yes.
It could go in a good way or a bad way, depending. Because if you're already
Well, assuming you have
overwhelmed,
a good one. Yeah.
well, if you're already overwhelmed and someone DMs you in Slack and says, "Hey, what's going on with so and so?" You're like, "Oh crap, that's like another thing I got to do today."
Right. I'm being
Right?
micromanaged. I'm being overwhelmed with everything.
Yeah. And keep in mind that it's not one person sending you that; it might be 10 people doing that to you.
Right. Yeah.
And
For
so
sure.
it's going to depend on the situation. I think the high level takeaway there is really that, like, look, when you're on the applicant side, you're going to try to maximize your chances, but there's a lot of factors outside of your control.
Yeah.
You're going to get turned down for reasons that are not within your realm of control.
and they're not even going to communicate them to you.
Right. Right.
Right?
Right.
Yep, exactly. Which just makes it challenging for everybody, right? And so I think
Right.
the other advantage of having that personal connection, if you're able, right, if you're able to get that feedback in a way that does not violate, right, the information sharing, I think especially for small and medium-sized companies as well, like if you're talking about the big national corporations, like they have very streamlined processes for increasing diversity, for sharing information or not, like being very clear, right? Like they even have systems for referrals where it's like you reach out to somebody at the company and they put a little check mark next to your application because that's how many referrals that they get. But I think for these smaller, to medium sized businesses that, they don't have the time, they're all overworked, they all have other jobs to do. I think sometimes having that connection, at least this is what I've seen for the students who've been getting job offers around me, is that having that connection can really be a game changer because at the end of the day, the small, medium sized business, they're growing, they're scrappy. They need someone now who can do the work. And if you've got somebody coming in vouching for you that like is a trusted person connected, that like no matter how you slice it, that's probably going to carry some weight. Now I know Keith, like I know you personally, and I know how attentive you are to statistics, not influencing, having bias in there, right? Like I know you are like super cautious. You wouldn't want to give undue advantage. But in terms of like what happens generally on average, I would think like that someone that's connected, and this is also what we're seeing as well with our students, having that connection, having someone vouch for your character, your work ethic, that the words on the resume actually match who you are, right? Like that can actually have a really big impact depending on the company and their policies, right?
Totally going to depend on the company and their policies. One thing that I will add to this is that like even in a relatively small company, so in the size of like we were between 50 and 300 most of my time there.
Hmm.
Even in a company of that size, we saw that we would track candidates based off of how they came in. Did they come in through
Hmm.
LinkedIn? Did they come in through Indeed? Did they come in through a referral and such and such? And what we saw even in that is that candidates that came in through referrals did correlate with going further in the pipeline.
Okay, interesting.
A part of that probably is a degree of like the filtering is happening earlier when you talk to your friend,
Right.
basically.
Yeah.
Whereas with LinkedIn, there's just a lot of folks that'll send 1,000 applications or some such,
Okay.
and they're just gonna send it out there and shooting their shot. And so there's a lot of like lower quality applications in more of the job websites. And so I did see
Right.
that. Um, some I could imagine some hiring managers taking that as a piece of evidence. Which pipeline you came in through. I tried not to, but your results will vary.
Right, exactly. Absolutely. And I think, just the sheer amount, I think it can really help a candidate to think through the other side sometimes of like, well, how are they actually screening for me? And one of the challenges that we face specifically in tech, like so far everything we've been talking about has mostly applied to any job, right? But tech has a very specific component of, do you actually know how to do the things? Right? And so there's this technical interview piece that varies widely, but actually attempts to assess someone's, experience level and technical expertise because there can be a huge gap. I know JavaScript. Well, can you draw like a line on the screen or can you build like a notepad app or can you launch the next, Uber or Airbnb? Like knowing JavaScript has like these huge variances. And so, Keith, can you speak at all to how, on the hiring side of things, we figure out how people like, do they actually know what's on their resume? Because I've heard people borrowing resumes, also making the hiring manager's job very difficult.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a lot of deception in the process. And what I tell people in on the hiring side of things is like, look, you can't filter out everyone. You can just maximize your chances. It's kind of actually the same on the hiring side. Is that you're going to do your best to make sure that you don't get fooled. Some people are going to fool you, and there are other processes that you got to employ.
Yeah.
It's not a perfect system, and it can't be a perfect system. But so in terms of technical assessment, again, varies widely by company. It used to be the case that people would do like whiteboard type coding, or they would do
Mhm.
more like algorithmic type stuff. Nowadays, like leak code is popular in some category of companies. So these online programming problems, they're collectively referred to as leak code. Other companies will do more take-home type work, so they'll give you a programming assignment. You do the programming assignment on your own, maybe take an afternoon or a day to do it, send in the results and discuss it. And then still others will do something maybe more kind of closer to the old school whiteboard problem, where the problems were fairly basic, just to see like, okay, can you program in general? So there's kind of a wide range of tech screens out there. Um, I am not particularly a fan of like the leak code style because it's deviating quite a bit from the actual job.
Yes.
Um, but then, if you look at something like a take-home assignment, which you can craft one specific to a role, and it can be very relevant to the job. Well, now you're really selecting for candidates that can find a free day, and unfortunately, that correlates with demographics. That correlates with
Oh.
things like age and childcare responsibilities and all these other things.
Mm.
And so there are ups and downs to all the different ways that you can do technical screening. Um, I don't think that anyone's really landed on like a great way to do it. But there's ups and downs. I guess I will say, unfortunately, a lot of the things do tend to correlate with demographics.
Right. Further locking us into not increasing diversity, right? Which obviously, like our
Well,
society needs diversity in tech because that's where the best innovation happens. Which are what we're going to say, Keith?
I was gonna say it's and each one shifts. It's not that every single type of thing is going to shift towards white male, which is sort of the
Right.
backstory of tech in the U.S. But they might shift in one particular way, or it
Mhm.
might be more of an age shift. It might be folks that say have more time and are more motivated. So it might shift it in favor of folks that are coming internationally into the
Mhm.
area, because the just the exchange rate means that it's such a huge step up for some folks. And so
Right.
it really, really varies. I wouldn't say that all of the different things affect diversity in the same way. They all have slightly
Mhm.
different effects.
Right, absolutely. No, that makes total sense. And I think, assessing candidates is one of the biggest challenges because, like, it's actually kind of an occupational hazard because, as technologists, a good technologist can teach themselves anything quickly. And so your resume can be crafted like to be stronger than you currently are, but you might be able to get there. And as long as you can get there, okay. But there's a lot of people that may say those things and may not actually be able to get there on the timeline the business requires. And so this makes it a problem that hiring managers don't know if they can trust the resume. So they have to have these other screening mechanisms in there. I agree with you. I found that leak code or hacker rank style problems, which we do use in the academy for practice, don't necessarily bear a lot of relationship to the job itself that most students or most applicants are actually applying for. What I can tell you though is that I've seen a correlation. Like even though the problems bear almost no resemblance to the work you do, like as a full stack web dev or as a data scientist, the thinking skills of the problem solving do. That I once allowed a student to move forward on the internship and work on a production web project without completing that step of mastering that problem solving, and they weren't able to move forward. They weren't able to do the work. And so even though there's this huge gap and disconnect, there's a really important thought process that happens in terms of your maturity as a problem solver that actually is a prerequisite for becoming a professional software developer. So this is why I think even though they're imperfect and they don't actually align with the work that you'll be doing at all in your day to day, why they may still often be used, because they're often a sign of someone who actually knows what they're doing or has that capacity to be able to learn.
I would say that a certain level is actually a useful signal. So there's a
Right.
certain, fairly basic level of problem solving that you're just, you're kind
Yeah.
of checking, can they solve problems?
Right. Yeah.
Um, I think where things have gone kind of sideways is that it became easy to kind of fake that, and so they went to the harder and harder problems or packed more and more problems into a half hour or an hour. And so I don't think that level of
No.
difference is a whole lot of signal on, whether they'll be able to learn the job. It is actually quite a bit of signal of how much they want the job.
Yes, how
And
hungry
so
they are.
so
Yeah.
there are actually so and this is why it could possibly be useful, right? Is
Mhm.
because you're filtering candidates based on how much they really want the job. Now,
Right.
do they want the job because they actually are interested in that position, or is it more of a money thing?
Right. Yeah.
Everyone's got their own path, but um, there is something that is predictive about how much someone wants a job, and how much, unfortunately, how much pain they're willing to go through to get it. Um,
That's yeah.
I don't think that's a great way to screen people, but there is
Right, it
probably
is what
something.
it is, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
well, because 'cause they're fairly plum jobs, and the reward, even if you're not a good fit, if you can pass the bar and pass the hurdles, you're gonna get paid for at least 3 months before they figure out how to fire you, right? Like,
Depends on
you
the
know?
company, but yeah, yeah. I
Right,
mean, and that's the other part of the equation. Really, is like, if you hire someone that is not a good fit, how quickly can you adapt to that? And many companies are very slow. Um, many companies are very slow at dealing with a bad hire, and this is actually a part of the reason why there's so many barriers in hiring,
mhm,
is because companies are, um, in general, slow to react when they have an employee that,
correct.
for instance, an employee that is harmful to other employees, that is toxic and like
Yeah,
takes the level of the team down. Everyone around
right,
them gets worse. There are employees like that, and many companies don't react very quickly to that. And
yeah,
so, what they've done is they screen much more aggressively. They're much, much more careful about who to hire,
mhm.
because they cannot adapt quickly to that other part because they don't have something solved there.
Right, and it's so hard to fire people. No, everybody wants to hire, nobody wants to fire, right? Like, nobody likes to get bad news. So, like,
Yeah,
people aren't inclined for it, right? They know you're gonna get upset, so they have to have objective measures. Typically, you express an objective standard, like, this is how you'll be evaluated. You go through a performance review, you have to give them an opportunity to try and fail again, and then fire 'em, right? So, like, typically, it's, for a well run operation, it's going to be a multi-step process to figure out that they're not a good fit, and you're going to be paying them the whole time plus unemployment after or severance. And so like, it is really expensive to get this wrong.
it really, really depends on the company, for those things,
Hmm.
about like how much formality there is, and even the country that you're working in.
Yes.
Different countries have different legal requirements about these things, about how hard it is and how not hard it is. Technically, in the U.S., there aren't uh, protections for employees.
No, probably not, but just in terms of like generally like what decent companies that you probably want to work for are doing, right? They probably have those types of processes in place, most likely. Not all,
Yeah.
but yes, but this could be why you might get a personality test.
Well, the personality test thing. So what's typical these days is to do a mixture of, we'll call them technical interviews and behavioral interviews. So
Yeah.
technical interviews will be, about writing code or designing a system architecture or whatnot. Behavioral interviews will be, a lot of times we'll talk about it as like cultural fit. So one team may really value moving quickly.
Mhm.
Another team may value reliability and safety, and so those kinds of things.
Right.
And so, as much as possible, it's better to do those types of more behavioral things. Um, I like the last time I heard about personality tests and hiring was like a friend kind of poking fun at a somewhat unsophisticated company using those in the process. So,
Yep, but it could be, right, if they're trying to screen for people that are gonna be a good fit on the team. But at the end of the day, like, the best way industry standard best practice, like, just in terms of hiring in general in business, is always to give someone a task that's as similar to what they'll be asked to do on the job as possible, right? And so that the best companies will make that alignment. In fact, I once this is a funny story. So once I had a student who got an interview in C. The job was in Python. So like there you go right there. If you have a company doing that, they may not be in alignment. It might not be a great fit if they're hiring you for Python but asking you questions in C. Like that's a huge disconnect.
yeah, I you reminded me of two different things there, and I think I lost one of them.
It's
um,
okay.
but one of the things I did want to bring up is also because we didn't really talk about the person interviewing you.
Yes.
The person interviewing you is a different group of person, typically than any of these that we've talked about so far. And so this is one of the challenges here is that they are typically employees. In general from around the company. For technical interviews, they'll typically be someone at least at your level or more senior. They'll usually try to get someone within the team that you're hiring into. For behavioral interviews, they may be people from around the company, may not be people in software engineering. And those people that are interviewing you, they, depending on the company, they might get an interview invite just show up on their calendar kind of out of nowhere halfway through the day.
Oh my goodness.
And they've got, they might not have gaps between their meetings even. So some of those interviewers, they're just like, well, I guess I'll do the best I can, And
Right.
so you might be coming into a situation where you got an interviewer like that that's like kind of getting treated badly by their employer, and it's not your fault, but that's the situation that happened on that day.
Wow.
There's
Yeah.
there's a lot of situations that happen that make it so that, the people interviewing you may be dealing with a lot of frustration as well. It can go well, can go badly. Of course, you want to give people pretty good heads up, but
Mhm.
uh, interviewing, how much you contribute to the interviewing process, unfortunately, is not typically a key contributor to like promotions or evaluations. And so
Mm.
the interviewers are typically going to focus more of their time on the core of their job, and many of
Right.
them do not see interviewing as this important thing, even though it will generally help offload work. It'll generally, if they hire someone bad, it's going to make their life a lot worse. If they hire someone good, it's going to make their life a lot better.
Right.
But maybe not everyone sees that because they haven't been, they're not as deeply involved in the hiring process as a hiring manager
Right.
who, interacts with all these things. And
Or that
so,
might not like or it could just be that day, right? Like, they're just overwhelmed that day with putting out fires and the work that's on their
any
plate, and they
number of
got somebody
things.
breathing down their neck and
Yeah,
yeah.
and it's I think it's, and this also kind of goes into this, like, you've probably heard the like manager schedule versus the maker schedule, where people in management roles tend to go meeting to meeting to meeting.
Mhm.
People in coding roles, really, meetings are very disruptive. Um, you really want
Yeah,
these big blocks of time to focus. Um,
exactly.
the interviewer schedule is like the manager schedule, meeting to meeting to meeting. And so
Mhm.
that interacts kind of negatively with software engineers, and it's actually kind of tricky to figure that out, to make sure that people are interviewing, they're meeting candidates, they're giving them the best chance that they can have, while protecting their time, protecting their schedule, and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of tricky things to solve there, that you don't get to see as the candidate, but that could be what they're going through.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think, so what does this mean? Just to take a step back for a second, like what does this mean for a candidate walking into an interview, right? Think about it for a second. There's all these stakes. Oh my goodness. You have to showcase that you're confident and that you know what you're doing, and there's this big job at the end of it that could be life changing, right? Like, and transformative, and like, so there's like all these stakes, you've got all these nerves, right? All these things you're trying to remember and to do, and you're walking into an interview, and the interviewer, the last thing they want to do is be talking to you, right? Because they have somebody breathing down their neck. They have the job that's similar to what you want, but like it is like overflowing from their workday into their life. And they are so done with doing anything else. So, okay, where do we come from? Right? As a person, like walking into this, right? So I think, some of the things that I would suggest is looking for some very simple tactics that you can use, a few key words you can say to help put the interviewer at ease. And like the more you can help raise the level of the interviewer, the better it's going to go for you, because you could uplift their mood and raise their vibe, and they are going to speak way more kindly and highly of you because they're so grateful for like you being an easy interview and helping make it easier for them. So the more we can think about ways to make it easier for
Mm.
the interviewer, I think is going to really improve your outcomes. Keith, do you have any recommendations on ways that we can help improve the interviewer's day and set aside maybe our own nerves about it and help focus on that? That might even help set aside your own nerves if you're focusing on helping improve the state of the interviewer.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you for myself, I try to
Mhm.
enter, whether I'm the interviewer or the interviewee, I try to enter the room as just like, look, I'm a person, you're a person,
Right.
we're gonna make that connection, and then we'll see where it goes from there. Not all situations, unfortunately, not all interviewing situations are recoverable. That's just a part of it. Um, but what the things that you can do on the interview side, like when you're interviewing, you're the interviewee, is you can just like help them through the thing. So there's a lot of folks that have a very standardized script that they have to get through. So you can say, like once you've gotten to know them a bit, you can, say like, okay, so what's next on the agenda or something like that. You can sort of like you know, help them get through that because sometimes the scripts can be pretty overwhelming, maybe to the point of being inappropriate for an interview, but that person, that wasn't their choice. They're
Right.
following
They're just
that
giving it.
script.
Yeah.
And so, just going through it like that. Another one is, so for folks in like talent teams and recruiting teams, sadly, like showing basic respect
Right.
um, is
Being a kind human will go a long way,
yeah,
right? A
treating
sensitive,
someone like a
kind human.
person. And what you have to understand is that someone in a role like that might be doing 30-minute back-to-back calls for 8 hours every day.
Right. So the
And
more you
so,
can make that half hour with you pleasant, the more they're gonna like write kind things about you.
yeah, like if they forget something, like look, you can get really brain fried doing that many calls every
Yes,
day. And
been
so,
there.
just helping people through that kind of thing. Um, uh, yeah, just trying to be helpful and understand that they're trying to do a task and it may not be a task of their choosing, and sort of helping them
Right.
get through that.
Right.
Some interviewers are more open about it, some are more closed about it in terms of like how much of the script they're kind of let on. For instance, with a behavioral interviewer, some of them will just say, "I am interviewing you for this particular value of the company," and they'll just be straight up with that.
Right.
Um, Other times, people feel they're like don't feel comfortable sharing, or they feel like it's inappropriate or whatnot. So just
Right.
read the signals, help them through it as best you can. But keep in mind that some people are having bad days, and even though this might be like the job that you need, unfortunately, they might just not be there today. Um,
Right. But the
and
more
so,
you can help them like focus and at least be memorable in a kind way, right? Like even because even if your skills are on par with the other candidates, if you've already demonstrated that you fit the culture, that you support the team, like there's so many things you can show in an interview by being kind to the
Oh
interviewer,
yeah.
right? And setting aside your nerves. Like you can show you're a team player, that you're in it for the good of the company, like just being present and kind and intentional, while you're there will go a long way. It's not going to be a slam dunk for sure, but all these things help, right? All these things are contributing factors. At the end of the day, there's lots of people applying for those positions as well.
Yeah, and with certain kinds of people, one thing that'll go a long way is just being yourself.
Right.
A surprising number of candidates aren't really being themselves, and
Yeah.
as the interviewer, you can tell that there's falseness going on, and you're like how much do I want to try to untangle this,
Right.
image that they're projecting versus like who they are. If you only have 20 minutes, you can only do so much with that. But it's kind of, after, because there's a lot of deception in the process, unfortunately, it can be very refreshing to have someone that's just kind of
It's real.
straightforward. Yeah.
Right. And because if you're not being real and true about who you are as a person, then they start to question, are you being truthful on your resume? Is this really who you are? Or are you just nervous? Like they can't tell, right? Like
Yeah.
they literally can't tell. So the more
Yeah.
you can
You can't tell.
practice just being you, like then they may actually believe your resume more, just speak by the virtue of the fact that you feel comfortable in your own skin. So, which I know is so hard in the job hunt process. Like, I totally get that this is actually a very challenging thing. It's not easy, but it can be that simple.
Well, even I think the thing about being yourself, really, like some of it comes from practice. It's like,
Yeah.
if once you've gone
Yeah.
through a number of interviews, you kind of get used to that environment. You kind of find a way that feels comfortable to you, and then hopefully that's a version of yourself that's pretty authentic, and that you're comfortable being that person. Kind of at any time.
Mhm. Yep, that's awesome. So, Keith, we have a couple quick questions. So Linda is asking, do you ever code during the interview? I think Linda's asking live, and I believe the answer to that is yes, because I've been on a technical interview
Yeah.
where I coded live, although it was, a bit ago with Google, but like I suspect this is fairly standard. Would you agree, Keith?
Yeah, yeah. Different companies take different paths, but typically the leak code style of interviews are done live. There are
Mhm.
some that are kind of the, more of a basic type of problem. Those can be done live. It's typical that you get a heads up that it's going to be a live coding, so you typically know ahead of time. I had one recently where I didn't know ahead of time. But again, you kind of roll with it. Once you get there, there's nothing you can do about that. You do the best you can.
Right.
So
Right, exactly. And it's not like you can really prepare for coding interviews, like if you find out like 2 days before or even a week before. It's something you have to kind of just be practicing in an ongoing way.
yeah, yeah. Although I will say it does tend to help to do things like you can look over the company's Glassdoor to get a sense of the types of coding that
Mm,
they ask you about. Usually recruiters will be friendly to you too and give you a sense of the types of questions that they ask as well, or if they're using a specialized platform for it. If you have the time, then it's good to familiarize yourself with the rules of that platform. So to give an example, when you're doing code editing in a web browser, sometimes it doesn't support the same kinds of key bindings as like VS Code, or doesn't support the same kinds of things. And so you might
mm,
accidentally delete stuff when you meant to do something else. And so, like if you have the time, you can familiarize yourself a little bit beforehand.
for sure. I hope there's no technical interviews happening on the command line via like Emacs or VI or something.
Um, I mean, I not for the kinds of roles that I go for, but it wouldn't surprise me to see roles like more in the DevOps space where you're having to
Yeah.
do more system management, to do maybe some of that, or maybe to do some investigation into a
Or like
situation.
a sysadmin type role, like some a role that requires the command line.
There
Right.
might be some, but I don't know how they set those up.
Yep. No, me neither.
They might try to find the ideal way would be to really have a controlled environment within a web browser, and then to do it within that rather than your own computer.
For sure. And Dara is actually asking, she's had recorded interviews. I don't know, Keith, if you've had any experience with that. I agree. Showing your personality in a recording is probably challenging. What I would consider is practicing, especially if it's recorded. It's probably not live. Trying to kind of practice and watch it back. Maybe share it with your friends and say, "Hey, does it seem like me, or am I like a wooden box?" You know. But Keith, have you any experience with this? Do you have anything to speak to there?
Not yet. I think that one thing that I will say is that if it's something that's recorded, maybe I had to do it once, I don't know. But if it's something that's recorded, probably a lot of candidates will just not do that, and so it's going to be a really lightweight way
Ooh,
for the
hmm,
hiring people to screen folks out, and so you'll at least get your stuff, your
okay.
recording viewed. Um, Oh, do you mean, a live interview that's recorded or a
It
standalone
sounds
recording?
it sounds like a standalone recording because
Okay.
it's showing your personality to a recording.
Oh,
So I
yeah,
think
yeah,
this
yeah.
is like, here, answer these questions on camera kind of thing is what I'm
Yeah.
envisioning. Dara,
I
please
wish I had
repeat
advice.
it.
I would say, practice, review your stuff.
Standalone. Yeah. Thanks.
It's going to be uncomfortable to, watch your own recording. It's hard to hear the sound of your own voice. That's common. But you get over it. You
You
learn
do.
a bit. I wouldn't say to obsess over that practice, but I would say doing some amount of practice is going to help you.
Absolutely. And there's different camps on this. So I actually can speak a little bit to this. So I'm a performer. I've also, given presentations at many different forms. Keith has as well as PhDs and academics. We get in on stage a lot. And so I can tell you, at least for me personally, I know that three is the magic number of practices I need, right? That like if I practice it three times, I can do it. I can get away with one or three now, 1 to 2 now. But when I was first beginning, three times was good. And if I practice any more than three, I was degrading my performance and it was coming across as pre-canned, right, and just kind of robotic. But I have known people that have practiced like every day for 30 days to give like a 10-minute talk, right? Like, and so for some people, it is about memorizing it and really knowing it, having it in there. And everybody's a little bit unique and different in what their sweet spot is. But I think we can all agree that practicing, recording, reflecting on what you're projecting to the world is a really important way and a really easy way that you can change how you're showing up on camera and potentially really have a lot more control over the interview process than is typical because normally it's live and you just have to wing it. But then, so what can you do if you're like going up for a live interview as well? You can still practice. You can write out interview questions and have a friend or family member ask you. Like, so practice, I think, is one of the easiest things that we can do to raise our ability to perform and perform well, even when the stakes are high. And this is how, Keith spoke before about showing up as yourself. It's a lot easier to show up as yourself when you're prepared, when you're not nervous. You're just like, yeah, I'm going to own this. Right. So do what you need to do to feel like you're owning the interview before you walk in the door, and it's going to go so far. Would you agree, Keith? Anything else you'd like to add on tricks or tips there on prepping and owning it for yourself?
I think for me, a part of it is um, not even so much preparing to the degree that I'm supremely confident, but just, looking at it as like, I'll show up and we'll have a conversation. I'll meet a person and maybe it'll go somewhere and maybe it won't.
Right. So I
And,
think,
really
yeah,
trying to take out a lot of the like, oh, this has to work, you know?
right. Right, the power of, like, standing in who you are, because basically, Keith I'm sure, Keith, you show up for an interview just as you're showing up today,
Yeah,
right? Like,
basically.
you just show up as yourself, like, and if it's the right fit, great, let's do this. If it's not, okay, right, shrug your shoulders, move on. Now, not all of us are that comfortable walking into a situation like that, right? But that's our job, in fact, though, a little bit, is to prepare ourselves so that we can be that grounded to be open to the possibility of it going either way. Because the last thing you want to do, too, is to walk into an interview and have it go sideways and then accept the job anyways because you feel like you have to. I remember my first professor job interview. I could hardly get through the day. It was awful. I couldn't get along with the chair at all. We would just like stare at each other. It was awful. It would have been a nightmare. Thank goodness they didn't make me an offer because I probably would have felt like I needed to take it. And I found a much better fit at a different university where it was like awesome all day long, right? That's how you know it's a good fit because it just feels fun even to be on the interview. So you can also use that as a way to help guide you on what's a good fit for you. Like, did you like the interview? Like, did you enjoy the process? I know that can be challenging, especially if you're in a situation where your financial needs are just barely being met or not being met. It raises the stakes, but at the end of the day, you want to be in this job for like at least 6 to 12 months before moving. And if you can't, if it's not comfortable for a day's interview or a half hour interview, it may not be a good fit. Right.
Yeah, I would say with some of that stuff too is like there's going to be some interviews where you're getting basically like red flags from them, and
Right.
you know you want to listen to your instincts there.
Yeah.
Um, and then there's going to be some interviews where a person's having an off day. So usually that's why you want to kind of go through a couple interviews before you get a sense of like, oh, like n- there was nobody here that I wanted to work with, and then you're like, oh, okay, well that tells me my answer there. And
Right.
exactly as you say too, though, is like, um, just showing up as yourself is something that takes years to for a lot of people to feel comfortable to do that. It also takes being willing to walk away, and
Yeah.
as you bring up, that is something that is going to come as your career develops, as your finances become more secure or stable or less of a concern. um, and so it's going to differ for different candidates in terms of like whether that makes sense for them at that particular time in their lives.
Absolutely, but I think a lot of power goes to the candidate when they have the ability to walk away. So, like, if you find that you aren't showing up powerfully for yourself on your interviews, if you lack confidence, one of the simplest things you can do, A, is practice will help with that, but also B, making sure you are totally cool with any outcome. I mean, and that can take some doing because this is something you want, right? You want this job or you want a job. Might not be this one, but you want a job. And here's an interview. It's right in front of you. So having the ability to be in that space where either possibility could be good and just gathering information towards that choice just is so important and so powerful because like you're going to show up differently when you can take it or leave it. You're going to show up as what's called an A candidate. These are the candidates that the jobs compete for, that they invite to apply. So when you can say yes or no, you can show up as the A candidate. And the interviewer can tell, right? Like you can tell when someone is comfortable in their skin. They're like, okay, this it's not worth my time. The problems aren't interesting enough. Right? Imagine turning down a 100K job because it's not interesting enough. That is an A player right there, right? Like they know they have their choice, they can go to whatever job they want.
uh, I would say I think it's the interview process is designed to be not so influenced by the level of confidence candidates are bringing, so it'll give you an edge, but
Right.
it's not gonna it's not gonna sway the loops drastically at most companies that have highly developed systems.
Yeah.
And then I guess there was a point to that. I forgot it anyway.
No worries. But yes, MC, seems like forcing it at a role that's not a good fit is an opportunity cost, keeping you from the best job for you. Yes. And totally a balance thing. Because the other thing we can do, I don't know if anyone has ever dealt with self-sabotage. You can also convince yourself that none of the jobs out there are right for you. So it really is about finding that balance and knowing who you truly are. That you're not just saying no because these little itty bitty things aren't perfect, but this is truly, you are not going to be happy here, right? Because it's a fine line. I've also seen people not accept any offer and get multiple offers, waiting for the perfect offer. So we want to kind of balance, right? And it really comes down to you knowing your personality and who you are. And if you're in the Joy of Coding Academy, talk to Nando. We'll get you connected. We have a very special Nia Jane personality test. She was live in the group, in end of the summer. We can get that for you. But knowing who you are and what your saboteurs are can be really important so that you can be on your guard. Because for some people, it might be just saying yes to everyone, and then you're stuck in a miserable job. And for some people, it might be saying no to everything, in which case you'll never accept a job. So you don't want to be on either extreme. But on the outside, I can't, like, in good conscience, give any advice on this because it's going to vary by the individual completely on which way you tend. I don't know, Keith, if you have any feedback
I
on that one.
I remembered what I forgot, which actually ties into
Good.
what you were bringing up, which is
Perfect.
that if you come away from most interviews learning something about how to talk to people, how to communicate, what you're looking for, how to communicate your skill set. If you learn from it, that was a worthwhile experience. You gained value from that experience. And so, to your point about, saying yes to everything, saying no to everything, it's important to take a step back periodically. That might be, depending on your job search, might be weekly, every other week, whatever makes sense for you, and reflect on, what's working, what's not working, what did I learn from each situation, and try to use that experience to improve yourself. Um,
Right.
and that'll help you going forward. That'll help you feel agency in a situation that um, often feels like it's taking agency away from you. And it really helps process the things. And
Exactly.
then I think there was another part to that question. Oh, I did also want to chime in on this bit about taking a job that you don't like. One thing that unfortunately I could tell as an interviewer and a hiring manager was that there were a lot of candidates that hated their jobs and they interviewed
Ooh.
poorly because
Oh.
they were trying to find a new job when they're burdened by so much frustration and
Ah.
just this crushing weight of stress of no free time while they're also trying to interview. And then, I would also interview candidates that had maybe taken a break after a job to kind of do a career reset. They were fresh, they were excited, they wanted to
Mm.
work. It was very obvious. And so
Wow.
it actually, some of this, like being in a job that's a bad situation, can spill over and affect your ability to interview at the next job. So just to kind of be careful about that. I
Right.
think there's probably ways to kind of minimize the
Mhm.
damage, like taking more days off, or setting as many boundaries as you can, but just keep in mind that um, it's it takes a bit of skill to transition from a job that is, really wrong for you,
Mhm.
into one that is better for you. It's not just about interviewing, because it
Right.
bleeds over into the interviews a lot.
Oh, wow. That's such great advice, Keith. Thank you so much. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, I know sometimes people they jump the gun and you just get in that desperation mode, like I'll take a job, any job, whatever it is,
Yep. Yep.
right? And so this is basically like the cost, right? It's an opportunity cost, and it's going to be a long-term opportunity cost potentially of your career, right? Are you on that path to keep increasing, right, and keep growing and going up to hundreds of thousands of dollars and beyond, or you get stuck where you are because you're so overburdened? And the only option is to walk away from that job you fought so hard to get, so you can actually get the space to get the next one.
Well, I don't think it's um, not everyone has to do that, of just like
Right.
quitting without options to kind of reset. I personally find that fits right for me.
Right.
But not everyone's going to have that option, and there are ways you can work around it. It's not
Yeah.
like, once you make a bad choice once, it's a permanent decision. Think about it like you're trying out a job for a period of time, and then
Right.
sort of see how it goes. But you want to reflect on that and reflect on whether you're continuing to grow, whether it's um, helping you personally, instead of kind of getting just sort of swept up in things, because some of these jobs can, it's a lot of time, and it's a lot of pressure. And it's sometimes, especially early on in your career, it's easy to get kind of swept up in just the momentum of things.
Right, exactly, exactly. Well, thank you so, so much, Keith, for coming and sharing your perspective today. This was so insightful. I hope you all enjoyed it. Great questions today, folks. If you'd like to know more about how to get your next tech career this year or in 2025, please join us this Thursday. I'm hosting a live masterclass on Zoom. We're going to talk all about it. So would love to share more insights with you that we've learned from interviewing hiring managers like Keith and other senior software engineers that have a lot of experience in this space, as well as helping dozens of students become six-figure software developers. We've really learned a lot in the last few years, and it shows. So what we found this year, despite the fact that many people complain that it's a tough hiring market, we've had a record number of students, more than ever before, have gotten job offers this year, and it's kept happening all year long consistently. So this isn't just like, some random thing. We've been finding that, the approach that we use with building connections and the production level experience that we teach has really made a difference and impact. So if you'd like to learn more about what that could look like for you, join us on Thursday. We'll walk you through exactly what you need to do to get a tech job as quickly as possible. All right, folks, great to see you, John and Dara and MC and Linda and Cello. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you soon. And don't be strangers. Keep on staying connected in our Facebook group. We'd love to help support you moving forward on your tech career, whichever direction that takes you. Thank you, Keith. Great to see everybody. Have a great day. Bye.